Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, after getting blocked by a federal appeals court, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration is suspending its enforcement of the Biden administration's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, which would require businesses with over 100 employees to get fully vaccinated or tested weekly. Kansas Senator Roger Marshall, one of a number of Republicans pushing back against the mandate, joins the Rundown to discuss and weigh in on the Democrats' economic agenda. And AAA predicts 53.4 million people will be on trains, planes, or highway lanes this Thanksgiving. Travel expert Mark Murphy shares his thoughts on what holiday travelers can expect, the potential for delays, and whether the industry has rebounded from the pandemic. Plus commentary by Fox News contributor Joe Concha. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Charles Payne.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Greg Jarrett, and this is the Fox News Rundown. Friday, November 19th, 2021. I'm Mike Emanuel. Americans are demanding answers about the origins of COVID-19, and a group of bipartisan senators plan to deliver with an independent commission to dig into the circumstances of the pandemic's outbreak.
Still to this day, there's more questions than answered. Just to help prevent future pandemics like this, as well as how to respond when bad infections do break out, we have to figure out these answers.
We speak with medical doctor and Kansas Senator Roger Marshall.
I'm Lisa Brady. Everything is not back to normal, but it may feel a lot like old times for holiday travelers.
Thanksgiving travel week, it's going to be huge in terms of travel. So be prepared for long lines, be prepared for a lot of waits, be prepared potentially for lots of cancellations, and have a backup plan.
And I'm Joe Concha. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
In the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, an independent bipartisan commission was created by Congress to prepare a full and complete account of all the facts surrounding the 2001 terrorist attacks. Now there's a bipartisan push to create that same type of commission to look into the origin of COVID-19. That effort is being led by Republican Senators Roger Marshall and Joni Ernst and Democratic Senators Dianne Feinstein and Kirsten Gillibrand. With the origin of the virus coming from China, a deep dive into COVID could be awkward for President Biden on the foreign policy front, since it's widely believed China misled the world on COVID.
China's trying very hard to project itself as a responsible and very, very forthcoming nation. That they are trying very hard to talk about how they're taking and helping the world in terms of COVID-19. And is China really actually trying to get to the bottom of this?
For now, the president's doing a diplomatic dance with Beijing.
It's just inconceivable that we've not done a real basic dive into what happened with COVID. Where did it come from, as well as our response?
Senator Roger Marshall, MD, represents the state of Kansas.
I'm very grateful for Senator Feinstein, Senator Gillibrand from the Democrat side of the aisle, and of course Joni Ernst from my side, working together to get this accomplished. I just think it's so important that we understand why. Where did this come from? You know, if a plane wrecks, we go to all types of links to find out why that plane crashed, right? And in this case, a plane crashed with millions of people on it. We don't know where it came from, and we haven't even begun to look what our response would be. So I think, like in Senator Gillibrand's case, New York was on the tip of the spear in so many cases when it came to COVID. I think that they both have some emotional, situations there, why this is important to them. And I appreciate them stepping forward, showing the leadership to say, look, we've got to investigate this.
In addition to representing the great state of Kansas, you are also a medical doctor, so you bring a medical background to this investigation.
Yeah, exactly. We volunteered very early on. You go back to March of 2020. We were working in ICUs, ERs, in clinics in urban America as well. I've really been following this story since January of 2020 when I first saw some news reports come out, and this just didn't make sense what I was reading. And my first conversation with the CDC in January of 2020 didn't go well. I thought that they were hiding some information from us. Just sounded the alarm then. And still to this day, there's more questions than answered. Just to help prevent future pandemics like this, as well as how to respond when bad infections do break out, we have to figure out these answers.
And those of us still walking around wearing masks a year and a half into this crisis, even though we're vaccinated, obviously there are concerns about the possibility that what if there's another pandemic over the horizon, and making sure the United States is better prepared, right?
Exactly, Mike. And I'm so proud of the work that we're starting to get done on the Health Committee to understand what we were supposedly set up for a pandemic like this, but obviously we had some failures. But we also started doing things better. The FDA found out it can move a little bit more quickly. The NIH found out it could move a little more quickly as well. But we absolutely were caught with our pants a little bit short when it came to PPE. And certainly we've just got a lot of work to get ready for the next pandemic, and certainly just even understanding the science.
You obviously know, traveling the halls of Congress, how polarized things are right now. How do you avoid the blame game, finger pointing, which is really so common today in Washington?
Well, I think on this particular issue, we keep focusing on number one is why we need to understand the origin of COVID. Look, so many people lost a loved one who died a very lonely death. Those people need closure. I think if this virus came from nature, we need to start building vaccines. So I think we need to be focused on not necessarily the politics of it, but make this totally apolitical. And that's why we're trying to set this up that the Democrats would get to pick 5 people for this commission. The Republicans would get to pick 5, and hopefully those would all be apolitical people. So I think we stay focused on the science, stay focused on the whys of how this happened.
Let's talk about another issue you're working on with some of your Republican colleagues, Senator Kevin Cramer from North Dakota, Rick Scott from Florida, Roger Wicker from Mississippi, along with the First Liberty Institute General Counsel Mike Berry, in terms of Navy SEALs fighting the vaccine mandate. What are your concerns, sir?
Well, the White House is obviously wants to separate all of our soldiers from the service if they refuse the vaccine. And probably, goodness, I really think there's still 20% of folks out there are not going to get the vaccine. And the White House has publicly said they want those soldiers to have a dishonorable discharge. And I think it's important your listeners understand what a red check mark a dishonorable discharge is. My dad was chief of police for 25 years in my hometown of El Dorado, and I remember him saying he would never hire a service person with a dishonorable discharge. Beyond that, they, of course, would lose their VA benefits, education benefits, access to the hospital. In some states, they would lose voting rights, access to health care as well. So we turn these heroes into zeros. And if I could just go on, I just want to bring this really home. If you get this heart inflammation, your career as a Navy SEAL, you're done. If you're an Air Force pilot, you're done. They'll probably never let you fly again. So would you be willing to put your career on the line for this vaccine, which has known side effects? And just to make sure I communicate with your listeners properly, look, I'm encourage people to consider the vaccine. My parents have had the vaccine. They've had the booster. I've had the vaccine. But it's 2 different groups of people. And that's why you can't take a sledgehammer to every problem like the White House is trying to do with these vaccine mandates.
And I've heard it's not just military folks, that there's lots of people who are serving on the front lines at the United States southern border who are concerned about the vaccine mandate. And so this may go well beyond the military as well.
Yeah, there's not an industry in this country that will not be impacted. I think if you dive into any industry, you're going to find 20-30% of the people are not vaccinated, nor do they want to be vaccinated. And they've taken a deep dive. They understand the pros and cons of it, and they've made that decision. That's why a federal mandate, any type of federal mandate, is not going to work, but especially one where we're going to take a relatively new medication and put it in your body. So it'll impact everybody. It's going to exacerbate our labor shortages, clog up the supply chains even worse. When I say vaccine mandate, you should automatically think inflation. That's what's going to occur from this, is more inflation as they try to implement this. 4 million people quit their jobs last month in America. 4 million people quit a job. And I think one of the main reasons is this vaccine mandate.
You made reference to inflation. I went to the gas station late last night, filled up, could not believe the numbers I was seeing. I think any folks who have been to the grocery store recently are seeing some eye-popping numbers of everyday products they love and they use that are certainly a lot more expensive these days. What are your concerns about inflation, and how is it affecting your folks back home?
Well, inflation and vaccine mandates are the number 1 and 2 issues I'm hearing the most about, and with the most volume back home. But you're right. Gasoline prices are up 60%. Groceries, gosh, they're saying it's 10 or 15%, but when I go, it feels like it's 20%. Everything that I've wanted to buy, whether it was a new battery for my truck or new tires, everything seems like it's up 20%. It cost over $100 bill to fill up my Dodge Ram truck now. This is not something you can just say, okay, let's stop the inflation. I've lived through the 80s. This is going to be a problem for a year or two and forever if we don't stop these horrible policies coming out of the White House.
Speaking of those policies, your Democratic colleagues are still looking to pass this $2 trillion or so dollar social spending package. Democrats are still trying to get that across the finish line. Is Senator Joe Manchin the key player in all this, or are you convinced that there are some other moderate Democrats in the Senate who have real reservations when you consider inflation and what it may do to our economy?
Well, I think the people up front and center are Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Kyrsten has really been fighting back all these tax raises, and we appreciate her and all of her work. She actually gets it. She understands business. She understands the tax policies and how they would negatively impact America as well. Joe seems to be standing tall. Remember who Joe represents. Those folks in West Virginia are conservative, hardworking people, just like folks from Kansas or in many, many states. So I think Joe is doing everything he can to fight for those folks back home. And I just encourage them to keep reaching out to him and say, stand tall. We appreciate you standing tall. So if they want to borrow more money, it's going to lead to more inflation, which is taxes people on the fringe ends even more than other people. My senior citizens on fixed incomes, young, hardworking families, those are the ones really feeling the sting of inflation.
Are you surprised by how this has all played out? You had Joe Biden running as a moderate, someone who had been in government for his adult life, basically, with a 50-50 Senate and a single-digit majority in the House of Representatives. Wouldn't this have been a golden opportunity to kind of lock arms between the two parties and tackle some of the major problems affecting the country and not go way off the left reservation in terms of this social spending package?
Well, I guess I wasn't totally surprised. When President Obama was in office, I was a hardworking physician. I still had, I think, 2 kids in high school and 2 in college. And someone said, don't watch what he says, watch what he does. And as I saw this Biden team assembling, it was basically the Obama retreads and the most liberal of that group, right? So I was very concerned that what he said and what he was going to do wouldn't be the same. And here we are later, like you said, a 50-50 Senate, but they borrowed $4 trillion already on top of the annual budget, right? But yet we don't have the NDAA done, the National Defense Authorization Act done. So they're trying to spend money, which isn't easy. You'd think it'd be hard, it'd be easy, but it's hard to spend $6-7 trillion out of whack. So they've been so busy with that. I think they've taken their eye off the ball of some other basic common issues like national security, for one thing.
Senator Roger Marshall, medical doctor, senator from the great state of Kansas. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day, sir.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be with you.
This is Joe Concha with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
This could be the busiest holiday travel season since before COVID. The Thanksgiving travel period officially starts today.
Now we expect to see substantial increase in passenger volumes, which will be approaching the pre-pandemic 2019 period of volume that we saw from 2 years ago.
Robert Duffy is the TSA's Federal Security Director for New York's LaGuardia Airport. He says staffing will not be a concern.
We've been hiring on an ongoing basis since early summer, and we'll continue to do so into early 2022. You also have the opportunity to use overtime.
But that doesn't mean there won't be long lines, as some Americans take their first trip in more than a year. One Adobe Analytics report in September suggested summer air travel had been dampened by COVID's Delta variant. But AAA is predicting that for the Thanksgiving holiday alone, more than 53 million people will be on the move, up 13% from last year. And while most will be on the roads, they expect an 80% increase in air travel, just a few weeks after the U.S. reopened to many international travelers, though there are vaccine and COVID testing rules to follow.
I think with the restrictions, you still have a major impediment for travel.
Mark Murphy is a travel analyst and author.
And I think you still have people that when you come to a country like the United States, when you go state to state, city to city, you've got rules of engagement that differ depending on where you're at. So there's not one uniform countrywide policy. So we have seen a nice uptick. But as you've probably also noticed, other than the excitement and announcement and people kind of rejoining family members they haven't seen in a couple of years, there hasn't been much more about it. And I think that's pretty indicative of where the travel industry is at today. It's still suffering greatly, but there are some bright spots.
I wanted to drill down with you a little bit on the airline industry, because I've read multiple times that business travel is lagging, and that's a crucial part, especially for the airline industry, of their bottom line. But I guess by extension for hotels and things like that. Is business travel ever going to be back to the volume that it had before?
So business travel is interesting because there's technology now that allows you to do things that you would normally get on a plane and go to meet with somebody face-to-face to do. So do I think it's changed for good? The answer is yes. I think it has changed for good. I think that one of the challenges you're going to have with business travel is all the pieces it touches downline. So sure, it's the airplanes, and that's where they focus their marketing efforts because those are their high-yield customers. Somebody who's a business traveler finds out on Friday night that they have to fly out Sunday to San Francisco, last-minute booking, that leisure ticket, if you would, becomes a $2,000 round trip, whereas the guy who bought it 4 weeks ago is paying $450. So that's where a lot of the profits made. That doesn't exist to anywhere close to the pre-pandemic level. It is coming back. I think one of the things that you'll see that's indicative of that are conferences, incentive trips, and things of that nature are coming back. I think the guy getting on a plane to go make a bunch of sales calls has definitely been pulled back. I don't think that'll return to what it was, but the industry will adapt. And on routes where the flights are not filling up in the front of the plane, they've got to have a different strategy, and it's going to be a price-driven strategy, and it's going to be a packaging strategy with packaging leisure hotels, with airline tickets, with car rentals, et cetera. That's going to be the approach, and they're going to have to adapt, or they're going to have to pull back on those segments that they fly. You know, instead of flying 6 times to London from LaGuardia from JFK, they might fly 3 times a day if you're American Airlines, for instance.
We have heard, in addition to staffing shortages and the wave of cancellations recently by Southwest and American, all the stories of confrontations on airplanes over mask mandates.
Yep.
Do you think that's holding a substantial number of people back from traveling, just not wanting to deal with any of it?
When you find out that somebody not only got their flight canceled 30 minutes before it was set to take off, that they couldn't get out of that city for 3 days as a result. These people have families, kids, school, work, and they can't get where they're supposed to be getting. And in the old days, if you had a major snowstorm, it would take between 24 and 72 hours to basically work out that domino effect. In some cases, you have to travel to a different airport at your cost, book a separate ticket at your cost. You might get a refund back, but the problem is that one-way ticket you're buying at that secondary airport on a different airline is now at maximum cost because they do this thing called yield management, and you're paying through the nose. So yeah, it gets very expensive, and I think that's a big turnoff for travelers and the headache associated with it. I think that's why you're seeing AAA is saying we're going to have record numbers. I think we're going to have more people on the road this year than we've had since 2005. And, air travel is going to be back to pre-pandemic levels this coming weekend. Thanksgiving travel week. It's going to be huge in terms of travel. So be prepared for long lines, be prepared for a lot of waits, be prepared potentially for lots of cancellations, and have a backup plan that includes driving or flying on a different carrier, and check with the contract of carriage on the carrier, because make sure that if you end up getting out okay, you can cancel that backup flight with no penalties and get a full refund. But again, most of the time you pay a high premium to have that flexibility.
Yeah, you just answered some of my next question about, traveling in general being more stressful than ever right now, and especially for a family who maybe has a flight booked for the holidays, getting ready to go to the airport. Anything else you can offer about, being mentally prepared to wear a mask, getting there early, things like that?
Wear a helmet? No, I'm kidding. So what you want to do is, if you are going to go ahead and get away during the holidays, you want to have a backup destination, potentially. You want to have a backup plan to get there. I mean, if you're flying to an island, you can't swim there, so you're kind of stuck flying there. You want to make sure that if you're taking a cruise, for instance, that you are prepared and know that if your flight gets canceled because the crew doesn't show up, which just happened to a friend of mine earlier this week on Alaska Airlines, not one that we've heard a lot about, and he got stranded for an extra day in Seattle. That's a fact that the cruise line doesn't care about, because the cruise line's going to take off with your money and an empty cabin, whether you're delayed or not. They're not holding the ship for you. So if you've got a family of 4 going on a cruise and you're dropping $5,000 or $6,000 for that cruise, then you better make sure that you fly into a place like Fort Lauderdale or whatever destination your cruise is going out of 2 or 3 days in advance to be completely safe. But we're so down to the wire now, most people have already made those plans. So I would recommend that they look at bookending that trip and figuring out, do they have the flexibility without taking a financial hit to modify that reservation, take the kids out of school if they're in person these days. If they're not, it doesn't matter. You can do it remotely, and take a hotel, do a pre-departure hotel stay. And that way you're going to be in a situation where even if you're delayed, the odds are you're going to make it there ultimately. I mean, if you're coming from New York, theoretically, it's a 16-hour drive to Fort Lauderdale, maybe 18 hours. And it would stink, but you could still get there and catch the cruise. If your flight got canceled and you couldn't get rebooked the next day, you would still be able to get there, but it would become the trip from hell, and it's not a good way to start a vacation.
But it's really all about alternatives and trying to plan out alternatives as early as you can. For people who want to book a trip and maybe it's not too late, they haven't booked it yet, not necessarily for the holidays, but even into early next year. Any advice for saving money? Is there a better time to book regardless of how you're traveling? And I ask this partly because, fuel costs have gone up. I'm imagining that prices for virtually every kind of travel are reflecting that.
The best time to travel is when you're not right in the middle of that holiday crunch, right? Don't travel if you can avoid it around Thanksgiving. Don't travel over the Christmas break if you can avoid it. Travel between the Thanksgiving break and before Christmas gets into full swing. By like December 18th, 19th, complete your travels. You will see that a cruise departure is a fraction of the cost in those weeks in between versus Thanksgiving week. And boy, Christmas, it spikes through the roof. Then after the New Year's break, look at all of the options over the next, like from around January 4th or 5th out to January 15th, 18th, whenever Martin Luther King holiday is this year. I don't know the exact date. It's always on a Monday. And people will take 3-day weekends. Sometimes they'll go away. And then you've got the next one, which is President's Day. So you'll find that January, the first few weeks of January tend to be great values at resorts because they clear out in places like Mexico, those all-inclusives. And that's the other thing. All-inclusive resorts are a fantastic option. And all of these, the best way to book all of these is always with a travel professional. I always stress that. I know a lot of travel agents. I had a business that addressed them from a media standpoint, gave them information, but as well as consumers. And when you find a good one, they know what the rules of the road are. They know what the COVID policies are. They make sure you have everything buttoned up. You don't show up and realize, oh, I didn't get the test and I needed a negative test or whatever it happens to be. And they're there when things go awry. So instead of you standing in line with 300 other people trying to rebook your trip, they're working for you because you have their cell phone and you're like, hey, Mary. Yeah. And Mary goes, yeah, I just got a notice. Your plane got canceled. I'm working on a backup. That's a person in your court. So in addition to looking at those gaps where there's less demand and there's tons of supply, always book with a travel agent. And people don't realize that booking with a travel agent costs them nothing because the travel supplier pays for that, as opposed to them having to pay their own people to answer 100 questions from the family that's going away for a one-week cruise or all-inclusive vacation in Cancun, et cetera.
Mark Murphy, travel analyst and best-selling author. We thank you, as always, for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I'm Guy Benson. Join me weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern as we break down the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest newsmakers and guests. Listen live on the Fox News app or get the free podcast at GuyBensonShow.com.
Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
And now, some good news with Tanya J. Powers.
Dina Martin loves to sing and entertain, and she comes by it honest. Her father was the legendary Dean Martin. I caught up with Dina recently, and I asked her to share a little good news with me. She told me one of the things that has brought her a lot of positive vibes is the social media exchange she has with fans during her weekly Facebook Live events. She's been doing them for more than 85 weeks in a row now, and she says putting good feelings out into the world has really made a difference in her own life.
It's quite remarkable to sit here and be able to sing, and someone is sending me a message saying, "Oh, I love that song, I'm in Ireland," and it's quite spectacular. So good news to me is that we've been able to bring some light into all of these people who have been shut in for all of this time.
She has a give and take with the audience in real time as they post their comments, song requests, and jokes. And she says the scope of the whole thing is sometimes hard to get your head around. Dina says she works on new songs for her fabulous Fridays with Friends.
It is mind-blowing, and it's a little scary because, it's a new song, and maybe I don't know it, and I'll mess up the words, and I laugh, just like my dad used to do. You make a mistake, just go on. Smile about it. And so the people there, and they're sending me jokes, and so I'm telling their jokes, and it's funny because they're just, corny, which is fine. And I'll mess them up, and they love that.
She's also been working on the new documentary Dean Martin, King of Cool, which is out now. You can join Dina every Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock Eastern on Facebook. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Joe Concha.
What's on your mind?
Yep, and watching other cable news networks and late-night comedy shows on the broadcast networks, it's like a memo went out, making it mandatory to call 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse a racist. I mean, only in this country can a white guy shoot 3 other white guys, and somehow race is made the central issue in the coverage. Maybe that's because the President of the United States once called Rittenhouse a white supremacist, which set off the echo chamber you're seeing now. Some of the people making these charges against Rittenhouse are the same geniuses who claimed Winsome Sears, the first black woman to win stateside in Virginia, supports white supremacy, which makes total sense. It's like the movie Dumb and Dumber, playing on a continuous loop. Except that's fiction. This is the real deal. The good news is, if sagging ratings are any indication, the American people are getting sick and tired of playing the race card from the bottom of the deck. I'm Joe Concha.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.